By the time I reached the top floor, my fingers had gone so numb, I almost dropped the silver tray. The service corridor behind me smelled like bleach, burnt coffee, and fear. In front of me waited the private wing of the Salvatore Hotel, where the carpet swallowed footsteps and armed men stood so still they looked decorative until they blinked. Nobody spoke. Not when they saw the lace robe tied around my body, not when they saw my knees shaking. One of them touched the earpiece at his collar and opened the last door. "Suite 12, he said. That was all. My mouth was dry enough to hurt. The silk against my skin felt obscene, hotel issued and cheap under the robe they had told me to remove at the door. There were tears on my face. I had stopped trying to wipe away, because wiping them only made more come. Under the cloche on the tray was not dessert. Under the cloche was a gun, and somewhere below us, in a room I had not been allowed to see, they were holding my sister. I could still hear Raffaella's voice from 10 minutes earlier. Velvet over wire. Knock. Smile. Say the line. If you warn him, Elena, your sister dies before you finish the sentence. But men like Raffaele always believed fear erased instinct. They did not understand that some instincts live deeper than terror. I lifted my hand and knocked. For 1 second, there was nothing. Then I heard it. A soft metallic click. Dante's lighter. I hadn't heard that sound in 2 years, but my body knew it before my mind did. My breath caught. My stomach turned over. It was absurd, the things grief remembered, not the words he had used when he divorced me, not the look on my father's face when the papers came. A lighter. A small gold sound from behind a closed door. The lock disengaged. The door opened. Dante Salvatore filled the frame in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled once, exposing the blunt strength of his forearms and the dark ink winding under his cuff. He was bigger than I remembered, harder somehow, as if the 2 years between us had been spent being carved into sharper lines. His gaze dropped once robe, bare legs, silver tray. Tears then rose back to my face. He did not move. Neither did I. The last time I had seen him, he had signed our divorce papers in a lawyer's office and never once looked directly at me. This time he looked too directly. I swallowed. "Special room service, sir." My voice cracked on the last word. His eyes changed, only slightly. But I saw it. Recognition was not soft on him. It landed like impact. Elena. Just my name. That was somehow worse. He reached for the tray. No. I stepped in fast, the word barely more than breath. "There's a gun under the quash. They have Gia. Don't." Dante moved. 1 second, he was in the doorway. The next, his hand was on my wrist, the tray stripped from me, my back against the wall inside the suite. The door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the art. He set the tray on a console, lifted the cloche with 2 fingers, and stared at the compact pistol resting on folded linen. His jaw locked. He did not look surprised. He looked confirmed. From the bedroom, a man stepped out with a rifle, half-raised, one of Dante's guards, not Raffaele's. Everything happened at once after that. Dante's arm came across my middle, shoving me behind him. The guard took in the gun, my clothes, Dante's face, and swore in Italian. "Who sent her?" Dante still hadn't answered. He was looking at the pistol. Then at me. At my tears. At the way I was trying not to fold in half from shaking. "You warned me first," he said quietly. I stared at him. The guard shifted. "Boss, out," Dante said. The man hesitated exactly half a second too long. Dante turned his head. That was all it took. The guard vanished. We were alone. The suite was enormous, all dark wood and winter city light through glass. I saw the half-empty whiskey on the table. The ashless burn of his cigarette, the neat cruelty of order everywhere. Even the silence obeyed him. I tried to straighten the robe that was slipping off one shoulder, tried to hide the fact that I had nothing under it except black lace and humiliation, tried not to remember how his hands used to know every seam of me. He noticed anyway. Dante stepped closer. Not touching. Never touching first. He leaned just enough that his voice stayed between us. Who dressed you like this? That should have frightened me more than the gun. I looked at the floor. Does it matter? His hand came up. Not to comfort, to lift my chin with the side of one knuckle until I had no choice but to meet his eyes. Yes. I hated that my throat tightened. Hated that he still had the power to make one word feel like law. Raffaele, I whispered. He said if I didn't bring it up here exactly like this, Gia would disappear. A muscle flicked in Dante's cheek. Raffaele. He gave no other reaction, but something in the room changed temperature. Where is she? I don't know. They took her from the bakery parking lot this morning. You still work there? I laughed once, but it sounded too close to a sob. You don't get to ask me ordinary questions, Dante. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. He didn't. That would have been easier. Dante Salvatore never did easy things. Instead, he dropped his hand and stepped back, as if distance cost him effort. You shouldn't have come here. I stared at him. That is an unbelievable thing to say to someone who was kidnapped into lingerie. A sound almost happened in his throat. Not a laugh. Too dark for that. Nicer than I deserved from a man I had just nearly gotten killed. Then his eyes fell to my face again, to the tears I still hadn't managed to stop. Little ghost, he said. So low, I almost thought I imagined it. You still cry without making a sound. The old name hit me harder than the rest. He used to call me that on nights when I wandered sleepless through whichever penthouse or safe house or villa he had hidden me in while pretending it was temporary. Little ghost because I moved quietly. Little ghost because I always looked like I was halfway between leaving and haunting him. Now it sounded cold. Possessive in the cruelest way. Not affection. Recognition. I racked the robe tighter. Gia. I heard you. Then do something. His gaze sharpened. You think I'm not? The lighter clicked again in his hand. I hadn't even seen him pick it up. That tiny sound scraped straight down my spine. He crossed to the windows and made a call in Italian so fast I caught only fragments. Warehouse. Cameras. Move now. No police. When he hung up, he stood there a second with the skyline at his back, all black glass and controlled violence. Then he turned to me. You're staying here tonight. No. Yes, I am not staying in your hotel. You're not in my hotel anymore. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? He crossed the room, not quickly. Somehow that made it worse. It means, he said, taking the pistol from the tray and ejecting the magazine with one clean motion. The moment you knocked on this door, Elena, whatever life you had outside this room ended. He opened the suite door and called for his men, and the old life I had built out of scraps closed behind me with it. Dante did not take me to a hotel room. He took me to a house that felt like a verdict. The Salvatore villa sat above the Hudson behind iron gates and cypress trees imported for the sole purpose of making New York look less honest. By the time we got there, midnight had soaked the city into black mirrors. I was wrapped in one of Dante's coats in the back of an armored SUV, still wearing the black lace beneath it because nobody had offered me anything else. And asking would have felt worse than freezing. Nino Bellini drove. I knew his name because Dante had once mentioned him the way other men mentioned, whether reliable, occasionally irritating, unavoidable. He kept glancing at me in the mirror, then away again, as if unsure whether to be polite or alarmed. Finally, he cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Signora, this is the strangest Tuesday I've had all year. It's Thursday, Dante said from beside me. Nino sighed. That actually proves my point. I should not have laughed. It came out anyway, small and shocked, like my body had forgotten laughter still existed and was testing it carefully. Dante's head turned toward me. Just a fraction. Enough that I felt it. Nino kept talking. Maybe because silence around Dante was the sort that made most men confess to crimes they hadn't committed. Also, before anyone blames me, I had no involvement in the lingerie logistics. Drive, Dante said. I am driving. I'm just clarifying the record. Rosa already thinks I attract chaos. At that name, Dante's mouth flattened in what might have been private amusement. Mine tightened around a sudden ache. There had once been a world in which I knew the names of his household staff, his allies, the wines he ignored and the coffee he actually liked. I had lived in the margins of his life just long enough to memorize them. Then he had cut me out. The villa doors opened before we reached them. Warm light spilled over pale stone. A woman in deep green scrubs waited in the entrance hall with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of face that looked kind until you lied to it. Rosa Ferraro took one look at me in Dante's coat and inhaled through her nose. Madonna. Her gaze lifted to Dante. If you tell me this happened on purpose, I'll poison your soup. Nino brightened. See? This is what I live with. Violence in an apron. Rosa ignored him and pulled me gently inside. Come here, Cara. Dante's coat slid from my shoulders. Rosa's expression sharpened when she saw the lace. There were bruises blooming around my wrist where one of Raffaella's men had grabbed me. She touched them with careful fingers. Bathroom first, then tea, then I hear the story. Dante said, You hear what I allow. Rosa turned and looked at him until even I could feel the temperature drop. I have stitched you together 3 times, she said. Be quiet. Nino made the sign of the cross. Dear Lord, thank you for not letting her keep cyanide in the pantry, that we know of. I laughed again before I could stop myself. Rosa's mouth softened. Good. She's alive enough to laugh. She took me upstairs, found me a robe that actually covered me, and handed me a clean dress that smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. In the mirror, I looked less like a purchased fantasy and more like a woman who had been dragged out of her life by the throat. I washed my face. The mascara went down the sink in gray rivers. When I came back down, Dante was in the library with a phone in one hand and a file open on the desk. He looked up once, saw the dress, and something unreadable passed over his face. Relief, maybe, or anger that had changed shape. Rosa set tea in front of me. Nino hovered in the doorway eating almonds with the expression of a man suffering a personal injustice. Those smell terrible, Rosa said. They're protein. They're sadness in a shell. He pointed at me. You see, this is exactly why I can't heal in this environment. Dante closed the file. Out, Nino. Nino looked at Rosa. If I die young, tell them it was emotional starvation. Go, she said, but she was smiling. When he left, the room changed again, lighter without him, harder. Dante came around the desk and stood across from me, one hand braced on the back of the chair opposite mine. He did not sit. Your phone. I stared at him. What? Give it to me. No. Elena. I said no. Rosa made a tiny sound in her throat and quietly retreated, taking the tea tray with her. Coward. I wrapped both hands around the cup she'd left me. You do not get to appear after 2 years of silence and start taking things from me. His eyes lowered to my hands, then rose back to my face. You led a weapon to my door. I warned you. I know. It should not have mattered that he said it like that. Like the fact itself had weight. I hated that it did. My sister is missing, I said. If there's even a chance she can call me, then they'll trace it. You don't know that. I know exactly that. He straightened. Even in stillness, he took up too much space. Controlled men always did, the violent ones most of all. I'm not your wife anymore, I said softly. That landed. I saw it. He looked away first, toward the fire. No. The word felt stranger than if he had argued. Then he held out his hand. Phone. I should have fought longer. Maybe part of me wanted an excuse to hate him cleanly, but I had seen the gun under the tray. I had seen the way Raphael had smiled, somewhere beneath the hurt, beneath the humiliation, beneath 2 years of trying not to care. I still trusted Dante with fear. I handed him my phone. His fingers brushed mine. That was all. A pulse jumped in my throat so hard it felt visible. He must have felt something too because his hand closed around the phone and immediately withdrew. like restraint had become reflex. Almost. The room filled with it. The thing between us neither of us named. He slipped my phone into his pocket. You do not leave this house. You do not answer any unknown number. You do not open any door unless Rosa or I tell you to. I looked at him over the rim of the untouched tea. And if I decide I'm done taking orders from you? His face gave nothing away. That was one of the cruelest things about him. He could make tenderness look dangerous and danger look inevitable. Then decide carefully, he said, and I knew I would not leave this house without him. Morning at the villa smelled like espresso, polished wood, and men pretending not to carry guns. I woke in a room so elegant it felt curated for someone softer than me. The curtains were half open on a gray river view. On the chaise lay new clothes in my size, tags removed. Dante had always been frighteningly good at logistics. Even when we were married for those brief, impossible months, he had known how to make survival feel seamless. Food arrived before I realized I was hungry. Drivers appeared before I reached for keys. Bodies disappeared from his world in ways I never asked about and could never stop knowing. Downstairs, the kitchen was already alive. Copper pans hung above the island, bread cooled on wire racks. Someone had set out blood oranges, dark chocolate, pistachios, and enough butter to make a priest weep. Rosa stood at the stove stirring sauce with one hand while reading messages off a tablet with the other. She looked up when I entered. You sleep? Some. Good. Eat first. I'd rather work. That got her attention. Work? I looked around the kitchen and, for the first time since the night before, something steadied inside me. Stainless steel. Precise heat. Order. I understood. I'm a pastry chef, remember? Rosa smiled slowly. I remember Dante once pretending not to keep every newspaper clipping about your bakery. I stared at her. She shrugged. Men say many things, their habits say more. Before I could ask what else Dante had pretended not to do, Nino shuffled in wearing gym clothes and a tragic expression. He looked at the bread, then at Rosa like a pilgrim before a false god. If I eat one piece, will I see angels? You already see angels, Rosa said. You call them Focaccia. He pressed a hand to his chest. Cruel. Then he noticed me beside the prep table with my sleeves pushed up. Huh. Civilization returns. Please tell me you make something with sugar. I'm 6 days into low-carb deprivation and beginning to hallucinate sympathy from Dante. I snorted. Rosa handed me an apron. What do you need? She asked. The answer came easily. Blood oranges, a heavy saucepan. Isomalt if you have it. Nino blinked. I'm attracted already. Not everything is about your stomach, Rosa said. Incorrect. Most of my suffering is. I worked because standing still made me think, and thinking made me remember the divorce papers on heavy cream stock, Dante's signature like a clean cut across the bottom. So I tempered chocolate, reduced orange juice, pulled sugar until it shone like amber glass in my hands. It took me 40 minutes to make the dessert. At the bottom of each plate, I spread bitter chocolate cremeux. Over that, blood orange cream light enough to collapse if handled wrong. On top, a thin shell of caramelized sugar, so clear it looked like strength, until the spoon tapped it and it shattered instantly. Nino stared. That, he said solemnly, is the most beautiful argument against diet culture I have ever seen. Rosa leaned beside him. What's it called? I should have lied. Instead, I heard myself say, glass hearts. Nino looked from the sugar shell to me. That feels pointed. It's dessert, I said. It's therapy with garnish. A quiet sound behind us changed the air, the metallic click of a lighter. I didn't turn immediately. I hated that I knew it was him before I did. Dante stood in the kitchen doorway in a charcoal suit with no tie, one hand in his pocket, the gold lighter in the other. Men paused when he entered rooms. Kitchens did too, apparently. Even the sound of simmering seemed to lower itself. His gaze went first to the plated desserts, then to me. There was flour on my wrist, sugar cooling on my fingertips, Heat in my cheeks I could not blame entirely on the ovens. Rosa, traitor that she was, slid a plate toward him. Taste. Dante did not move. I'm working. Nino took a heroic bite of his own and nearly groaned. So am I, and yet here I stand in the face of sacrifice. Dante ignored him and stepped farther in, close enough for me to smell the cold on his coat and the darker edge of his cologne under it. Bergamot, smoke, winter air. He looked at the dessert again. What is it? I wiped my hands on the apron. Chocolate, orange, sugar. His eyes lifted, waiting. I should not have answered the deeper question. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wanted him unsettled. Strong on top, I said. Fragile in the wrong place. Nino made an emotional noise. I need to sit down. Dante took the plate at last. The spoon cracked the shell with a sound so delicate it made something pull low in my stomach. He tasted, swallowed. Nothing changed in his face. Then he set the plate down with absurd care. We found the van used to take Gia, he said. The kitchen lost its warmth. I took a step toward him before I could stop myself. And empty. Something inside me dropped clean through. Dante looked at Rosa. With me. Rosa's gaze sharpened. What happened? Security footage was erased from the hotel server. His attention shifted briefly to Nino. Someone used internal clearance. Nino stopped joking. Inside? Yes. I looked between them. What does that mean? It means, Dante said, eyes on me now. Someone close to me helped put you on that elevator. A cold current moved through the room, not panic. Worse. Pattern. Conspiracy. The shape of something old and rotten, waking up. For one reckless second, I almost asked him the question that had lived under my ribs for 2 years. If someone close to you betrayed you then, too, was that why you divorced me? But I did not. Because his face had gone distant in a way I recognized from our marriage, that terrible, disciplined withdrawal. The one that meant some private door had just slammed shut inside him. He put the letter away. Nino, he said, lock the grounds. And I knew someone was already moving against us. The first shot I heard inside the villa sounded exactly like a bottle breaking. That was the thing about wealthy houses and violent families. Everything was so beautiful it took a second too long to recognize damage. I was in the wine cellar with Rosa when the sound came again louder, sharper, final enough to turn my blood cold. She had sent me down for a crate of sparkling water because apparently even on the edge of war, dinner still required bubbles. Rosa swore in Italian and grabbed my arm. Down. Another shot cracked overhead. Men shouted. Something heavy hit the floor upstairs. The cellar lights flickered once. I crouched behind a stack of wooden cases while Rosa pulled a small pistol from somewhere beneath her cardigan, which should not have surprised me and absolutely did. You have a gun, I whispered. I have lived with mob men for 20 years, she said. Of course I have a gun. Even terrified, I almost smiled. Footsteps thundered above us. Then, on the cellar stairs, Rosa raised the pistol. The door burst open. Dante came through first, black coat open, blood on one cuff that I could not tell was his. He took in the scene in one sweep, me on the floor, Rosa armed, the back service door hanging half open, and crossed the room in 3 strides. Move, he said. Not to us. To the men behind him. Tommaso Ricci appeared at his shoulder, broad and dark-haired. One hand pressed to his side where blood seeped between his fingers. I knew him vaguely from the hotel. Head of security, ex-cop, somebody once told me, before loyalty started paying better. They came through the east wall, he said tightly. 2 down, 1 ran. Dante's gaze dropped to Rosa. Anyone here? No. Then to me. That look landed harder than the gunfire. It was the kind that counted bones. Checked breathing. Assessed damage. I'm fine, I said automatically. He crouched in front of me anyway. No, you're not. It was the first soft thing he had said since I arrived. It made anger rise in me so quickly it almost felt like relief. You don't know what I am." His hand closed around my ankle, not roughly, to check whether I could stand, but his palm through the thin fabric of my skirt sent a shock so pure and humiliating through me that I forgot the rest of the sentence. Almost. Always. Almost. He must have felt it too, because his fingers tightened once, then withdrew. Controlled. Deliberate. Cruel in its restraint. "Can you walk?" "Yes." He stood and turned to Tommaso. "Seal the lower gate. Nobody in or out unless I clear it." Tommaso nodded, jaw hard against the pain. When he looked at me, there was no warmth in his expression. "Only warning. You should leave while you still can," he said. Dante's head snapped toward him. Tommaso met it without blinking. "She's leverage. Everybody knows it." Rosa muttered. Wonderful bedside manner. But Tommaso wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. Dante stepped toward him. "Say it again." Tommaso's shoulders squared. "If they know what she is to you, they won't stop." The silence that followed felt armed. Then Dante said, quietly enough to make it dangerous, "Get stitched, now." Tommaso left. Rosa exhaled. I liked him better bleeding. She holstered the pistol and started up the stairs. Dante moved aside for her. I did not miss the way his eyes tracked the smear of blood on the steps, the broken rhythm in his breath. He hated breaches, hated being reached. A memory hit me sharp as cold water. Dante waking in our old apartment after 1 hour of sleep, because a smoke alarm in another unit had gone off, the way he had already been standing before the second beep, the way his hands had shaken only after he realized there was no fire. I looked at the blood on his cuff. "Were you shot?" "No." "You're bleeding." "Not mine." My stomach turned. Rosa disappeared upstairs. Dante stayed where he was. One hand braced on the cellar door, boxing me in without seeming to. The light above us buzzed faintly. The air smelled like cork, dust, and adrenaline. "Who was Lucia?" I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. I saw the impact. Tiny, devastating. He went completely still. I didn't know her name from him. I knew it from the one night in our marriage, when he had spoken in his sleep and reached for someone who wasn't there. Dante looked away first, toward the racks, toward the dim end of the cellar where shadows gathered thickest. My sister. The words were flat, sanded down by use or avoidance. I couldn't tell. What happened? He laughed once, without humor. Exactly what I spend every day preventing. That should have been the end of it. With any other man, maybe it would have been, but grief recognized itself even when dressed in power. She died because someone got inside, didn't she? His jaw locked. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Above us, a door slammed. Men's voices rose and fell. The entire villa seemed to breathe around the violence. Then Dante looked back at me. Something in his face had gone stripped down. Not softer. More dangerous than that, honest in the wrong direction. "I divorced you," he said, and stopped. Every muscle in my body tightened. He said nothing else. The almost of it hurt worse than silence. He reached up then, very slowly, and touched a strand of hair stuck damply to my cheek. Knuckles only. The barest contact. My eyes closed before I could stop them. When I opened them again, his hand had already dropped. Restraint. Again. Always when it mattered most. Nino's voice floated down the cellar stairs a second later. "Boss? Rosa says if Tommaso bleeds on her clean tiles again, she'll finish the job herself." The air broke. Dante stepped back. Upstairs. I obeyed because my knees had started shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with gunfire. At the top of the stairs, he stopped me with one word. "Elena." I turned. His gaze held mine for one unbearable second. "Stay where my men can see you." It should not have sounded like care, it did. The next morning I nearly killed Dante by accident. Not with a gun, with coffee. The breakfast room overlooked the winter garden, all frost silver glass and white stone planters no one had bothered to fill for the season. Dante sat at the far end of the table with a stack of documents, black shirt open at the throat, one cuff unbuttoned. Nino stood by the sideboard arguing with a basket of pastries like they had insulted his ancestry. "I'm just asking for one croissant," he said. "A morally responsible croissant. A croissant that understands portion control." Rosa set down a fruit plate. "You are a grown man mourning laminated dough before 9 in the morning." "I have suffered nobly." Tommaso entered then, paler than yesterday but upright, carrying a silver coffee service. He set it near Dante and gave me a brief nod that was not quite apology for the cellar warning. His bandaged side pulled at his jacket when he moved. I noticed the smell before anyone else did. Not coffee, under it. A bitter, medicinal edge. Faint. Wrong. My father had gambled away enough kitchens and catering contracts in my childhood that I had learned to recognize contamination the way other girls learn piano scales. Cheap almond essence. Burnt pits. A chemical ghost inside the roast. "Don't," I said. Every head turned. Dante's fingers had already closed around the cup. I was out of my chair before I realized I'd moved. I hit his wrist hard enough to spill coffee across the tablecloth. Tommaso swore. Nino yelped for the pastry basket like the liquid might spread. Dante was on his feet in a second. "What are you doing?" My chest heaved. "Smell it." He went very still. I picked up the silver pot, ignoring the heat biting my hand, and held it under Tommaso's nose first. He frowned. Nino leaned in and recoiled theatrically. "That smells like murder and bad catering." Rosa took the pot from me and inhaled. Her face changed. "Almond," she said quietly. Dante looked at Tommaso. "Who touched the service?" Tommaso's mouth flattened. "Kitchen runner. Knew. Find him." Tommaso was already gone. Only then did I realize Dante still had coffee on his hand where I'd struck the cup away. It ran in a brown line over his knuckles, cooling. "I'm sorry," I said stupidly. His eyes dropped to my face. "For what?" "Hitting you." A strange, brief thing flickered in his expression. "You saved my life." The room fell silent around us. Nino, apparently sensing reverence and wishing to ruin it before it settled, sighed dramatically. "This is terrible for morale. Now she's not only beautiful and tragic, she can detect poison. Rosa, be honest, do I bring anything at all to this household?" Rosa patted his cheek. Comic decline. He looked touched and offended at once. Dante sat back down, but he did not resume reading. His attention remained on me in a way that made my skin feel too small. "How did you know?" I steadied my hands by curling them around the chair back. My father used to buy low-grade almond extract instead of the real thing. I learned the smell young. Saying my father aloud in this house always felt like introducing a rat into church. Dante's jaw hardened. "Does he know where you are?" "No." "Did you tell anyone you were working late yesterday?" I hesitated. That was enough. Dante stood again, slower this time. "Who?" "My father called," I admitted. "Yesterday afternoon, before they took Gia. He wanted money. I told him I was at the bakery, then going home." The silence that followed was thick with consequence. "You told him where you'd be," Dante said. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't." The coldness in his tone sliced deeper because it wasn't loud, just precise, controlled disappointment. Maybe he thought that hurt less. "It didn't," Rosa tried gently. "Dante." He cut her off without looking away from me. "How often does he call?" "Whenever he needs something." "How often do you give it?" I crossed my arms because otherwise I might have wrapped them around my ribs and called it dignity. "Why do you care?" His laugh was short and ugly. "Because your father once sold the location of a charity gala to men who planned to shoot me in the parking lot." My breath caught. "He what?" Dante looked almost surprised I hadn't known. Then his face shut down. "Forget it. I can't forget something you just said." But he already had, not the fact. The willingness to speak. That was his cruelty. He gave you the edge of truth, then let you cut yourself on the missing rest. He left the room before I could stop him. I stood there shaking with a different kind of fear now, not the kind Raffaella caused, the kind that came from realizing pieces of your life had been arranged around you while you called it love, family, marriage, survival, and never once saw the whole pattern. Later, in the kitchen, I worked sugar until my hands stopped trembling. Rosa stayed beside me, chopping candied peel with efficient little sounds. "He thinks anger is safer than honesty," she said. I did not look up. "That isn't an answer." "No. But it's true." I poured spun sugar over a metal mold and watched it harden into a thin amber spiral. Delicate. Beautiful. One wrong touch, and it would collapse. "That's me," I said before I could help myself. Rosa's knife paused. I laughed softly, embarrassed by my own honesty. "Ridiculous, isn't it?" "No." She slid the board aside. "Human." I had just lifted the sugar piece when Dante entered the kitchen. No lighter this time, no warning sound, just the sudden weight of him in the room. His gaze went to my hands, to the sugar spiral catching light like glass. "What is that?" "A crown," I said. "For what?" "I set it on the cake. For something fragile pretending to be hard." Nino, entering behind him with tragic timing, looked at the finished dessert and put a hand over his heart. "If she keeps doing this, I'm going to fall in love with my own funeral." Dante's eyes stayed on me. Then he said, very quietly, "You made a mistake." The words hit like open palm. I nodded because I had. His stare did not soften. "It cost me a secure route and almost cost me my men. Don't make another." I looked down at the sugar crown. It cracked under my fingers. War arrived at the docks in sleet. I knew something was wrong the moment Dante told me to put on flat shoes. No explanation, no argument invited. Just a black wool coat handed to me by Rosa and Dante's voice from the hall. Now. Gia had been sighted near a private marina on the Hudson, moved between vehicles, by men tied to one of Raffaella's shell companies. We were not supposed to go. Dante had said that twice. Then the call came from Tommaso, visual confirmation. 10-minute window, and somehow I ended up in the back of an SUV with Dante and Nino while rain needled the glass and Manhattan looked like a city drawn in charcoal. No one spoke for most of the drive. Then Nino muttered, "If I die near freezing water, I want it noted officially that I requested a warm, pastry-adjacent death." Dante didn't look up from the rifle magazine in his hands. Denied. Of course, tyranny. I almost smiled, but my stomach was too tight. "If Gia is there, I need to see her." Dante finally raised his eyes to mine. "If Gia is there, you stay in the car." "No." "Elena." "No." The look he gave me should have been enough to stop sane people. I had, unfortunately, run out of sanity around him 3 days ago. "She's my sister, and you're my problem." The words should have angered me. Instead, heat moved strangely through my chest, painful in its own way. Nino made a helpless little motion with both hands. "I'm asking respectfully that nobody have a marital relapse while bullets are expected." "We are not married," I said. Dante's expression did not change. Nino exhaled. "Yes, that always goes well when people say it through clenched teeth." The marina came into view through rain and halogen glare. Boats rocked black and silver against the slips. Men moved between warehouse shadows. Tommaso's voice crackled through Dante's earpiece. Then everything ruptured. The first shot hit the windshield. Glass starred. The driver swore. Dante shoved me down with a force that took all air from my lungs just as the second shot tore through where my head had been. Nino was already out of the car, firing from behind the engine block. Men scattered across the docks. A floodlight exploded overhead in sparks. "Stay down," Dante said. I grabbed his sleeve. "Gia." Another shot. He turned, fired once through the shattered windshield, then opened my door from the inside and half-dragged me behind the SUV. Rain slapped my face. The dock was slick beneath my shoes. Across the lane, I saw her. Gia. Hands zip-tied, shoved against a piling, mouth bloodied, eyes huge. I started toward her. Dante caught the back of my coat and hauled me into him so hard I hit his chest. A bullet snapped through the space I had just occupied and smacked into the dock behind us. "Do not do that again," he said into my hair. Then he moved. I had seen men fear Dante. I had seen rooms bend around him. I had never seen this. He became pure function, efficient enough to be terrifying. He crossed open ground like he had already decided what he was willing to lose, and found it acceptable. One man went down beside the fuel drums, another at the warehouse door. Dante reached Gia, cut her free, shoved her toward Tommaso's advancing cover team, then turned back, because I had become the real target, a hand clamped around my throat from behind. Not choking, controlling, dragging. I bit down on the gloved wrist and heard a curse. My attacker yanked me backward toward the warehouse, one arm locking around my ribs, gun jammed against my side. Rain blinded me. My boots slid. I thought distantly, so this is what leaving my body feels like. Then Dante saw. I knew the exact second because every sound around us changed. Men shouted. Nino yelled something obscene and probably creative. Dante fired once, missed because the man used me as a shield, and threw the gun aside with the kind of fury so focused it went silent. He came at us with a knife. It was over in 2 seconds. Afterward, I would remember the man falling. The hot spray across my cheek that was not rain. Dante's hand on the back of my neck so steady it did not match the blood on him. The way he checked me for injuries with the same ruthless thoroughness he probably used on weapons. "I'm fine," I said, though I was shaking so hard my teeth hurt. He looked at me like he wanted to say many things and trusted none of them. Instead, he took me to the safe house across the river when the marina became untenable. Gia went with Rosa to a different location. Tommaso stayed behind to finish the retreat. No one argued with Dante after what they had seen at the docks. The safe house was an old brick townhouse stripped down to essentials. Upstairs, in a room with one lamp and rain ticking against the windows, Dante cleaned blood from my face with warm water and a towel. Not mine, mostly. I sat on the edge of the bed. He stood between my knees. Every touch was careful enough to hurt. "Why?" I whispered. His hand stilled. "Why what?" I looked up at him. "Why did you come apart like that?" He should not have answered. Men like Dante survived by refusing exactly this kind of question. But maybe the storm had shaken something loose. Maybe near loss made honesty less optional. Dante set the towel aside. For 1 second, his eyes closed. And when he opened them, I was no longer looking at a boss. I was looking at a man at the edge of a truth he hated. Dante. He had known at the hotel door. Not when he saw the lingerie. Not when he saw the tears. When she warned him, half-naked, terrified, used as bait, and her first instinct was still to save him. No one had done that for him since Lucia. It had entered him like a blade and stayed there. Little ghost, he thought, staring at the trembling mouth he still had not kissed. "You chose me first. God help me, that was it." He drew in one slow breath, then his thumb touched the corner of my mouth. "You warned me before yourself," he said. "That was the first mistake." My eyes burned. "And the rest?" I whispered. His hand slid into my hair, not possessive, anchoring, asking without asking. "The rest," he said, voice rougher now, "was losing you once and finding out I can't do it twice. I did not say I want you. I did not know how to say anything that brave, so I said the truth that cost me more. If you kiss me now," I whispered, "I won't know how to leave again." Something broke across his face. Not composure exactly. The shape of it. He kissed me like restraint mattered, even while it was failing. Slow, careful, almost aching in its gentleness. His forehead rested against mine when he pulled back, both of us breathing like the room had changed altitude. "Little ghost," he murmured. War had arrived. Tommaso died because I made a phone call. Not directly. Life was uglier than that, less neat. But when the truth got stripped down, that was the bone of it. He lasted until dawn. They brought him to the villa after the marina ambush with a bullet wound that looked survivable, until it didn't. Internal bleeding, Rosa said, hands red to the wrist and eyes gone flint hard with helplessness. Dante stood outside the room while she worked, because he knew enough not to get in her way. I sat on the hallway bench with Gia asleep against my shoulder and counted the spaces between footsteps like prayer. At 5:12 a.m., Rosa came out and removed her gloves. Nobody asked. Nino leaned against the wall and covered his mouth with his hand. For once, no joke arrived to save us. Dante just stood there with both hands at his sides, still enough to scare me. Tommaso had been with him 11 years. He had once dragged Dante out of a federal sweep through a hotel service tunnel and taken a knife for him in Queens. He had also told me to leave while I still could. Maybe he had known more than the rest of us. Maybe he had just been honest. Gia woke when I started crying. "I'm sorry," I kept whispering, though no one had asked for that either. "I'm sorry, I told my father where I was. I'm sorry." Dante did not look at me. That hurt worse than if he had. The funeral arrangements happened by noon, because this world moved bodies quickly and grief like contraband. Men came and went through the library with lowered voices. Cars waited at the gates. Guns got cleaned in the garage. Somewhere in all of it, my sister ate soup at Rosa's kitchen island and stared at the wall like shock had made a home inside her. By afternoon, Dante handed me 2 passports and 2 boarding passes. My name sat under another woman's face. So did Gia's. Milan. Departure in 3 hours. I looked up, slowly. Dante stood on the far side of the library desk with his gold lighter turning once between his fingers. The small metallic click loud in the room's silence. He had changed his shirt after Tommaso died, but not his expression. Grief sat on him like tailored clothing. Exact, expensive, impossible to remove. "You're sending us away." "Yes, no." His jaw tightened. "This is not a negotiation." "It wasn't a negotiation when you divorced me either." That did it. The lighter stilled in his hand. Gia, pale and hollow-eyed from the sofa, looked between us. Nino found something fascinating about the ceiling, and backed toward the door with the instinct of a man who knew when emotional crossfire was about to become fatal. Dante said, "Nino, take Gia to the car." Gia stood, but not before catching my hand. "Elena, I'll come," I lied. She nodded because shock made liars of all of us. Nino guided her out gently, one hand at her elbow. When the door shut, the library felt too large. Dante set the passports on the desk. "I should have done more 2 years ago," he said. I laughed, sharp and unbelieving. That is a spectacularly elegant way to describe blowing up my life. His eyes lifted to mine. "Raffaele put a contract on you." Everything inside me stopped. "He what?" "He wanted leverage." I refused. Dante's voice stayed level, which somehow made the words worse. "As long as you were legally tied to me, you were on family paper, reachable, so I cut the tie before he could use it." I stared at him. "You divorced me to save me?" "I divorced you because it was the only way to make you disappear fast enough." The room tilted, not from relief. Relief would have been too clean for that truth. There was anger in it, humiliation. Love made stupid by silence. 2 years of grief reshaping themselves into something harder to carry. "You let me think you didn't want me." His throat moved once. Want had nothing to do with it. That was the closest he had ever come to begging. I hated him for it, loved him for it, wanted to throw the passports at his face and crawl into his arms in the same breath. Instead, I whispered, "Tommaso is dead." "I know." "Because of me. Because of war." "No." My voice broke. "Because I made it easier." Dante came around the desk, slow enough that I could have walked away. I didn't. When he stopped in front of me, there was less than a breath between us. "Listen carefully, little ghost." The nickname was rough now, stripped of its old coldness. "If you stay, more blood will come. If you leave, I can end this without wondering where you are every second. So you will get in that car." He reached past me for the passports. I took them first. An hour later, I was in the back seat with Gia asleep against the window and Nino driving us toward the airport through sleet that turned the city to blurred silver. The boarding passes lay in my lap like surrendered lives. Nino glanced at me in the mirror. "For the record, I hate this plan. You work for him. I also possess eyes." I looked down at the fake name printed over mine. "The Tommaso No? About why he divorced you?" Nino was quiet a moment. "Yeah. And he still told me to leave." Nino's mouth twisted. Tommaso loved people by being rude. It was exhausting. Against my will, I smiled. He sighed. He was going to ask Rosa to dinner after this ended. Kept pretending he wasn't because apparently all the men in Dante's orbit were cursed by communication. My chest hurt so badly I had to look out the window. At the next light, I took out my real phone, the one Rosa had slipped back into my coat pocket before we left, and called the bakery. Leela answered on the second ring. I could hear mixers in the background. Sugar trays. My old life. "I'm not coming back," I said. Silence. "Then, Elena, what happened?" "Sell my share to cover whatever my father owes you. Change the locks. Do not tell him where I am." "Elena, please." Her breath shook. "Okay." When the call ended, I set the phone beside the boarding passes and understood, with an odd calm, that I had just cut myself loose from the last ordinary thing I owned. The airport signs loomed ahead. "Nino?" I said. He saw something in my face and swore softly. "No." "Yes. Rosa is going to poison me. Dante is going to bury me under concrete. Probably. Turn around anyway." He tightened his grip on the wheel. "You have a real exit here." I looked at Gia sleeping, at the bruises shadowing her wrists, at the boarding pass with a borrowed name, then at the city behind us where Tommaso was dead and Dante was getting ready to go to war alone. "I know," I said. "Turn around." Nino searched my face another second, then took the next exit so hard. Gia barely stirred. It cost me a future. I went back anyway. I walked into the dark myself. By the time we reached the villa again, the gates were open and every light in the front drive was on. That was wrong. Houses like Dante's did not gape. They clenched. Nino braked hard. "Stay here." I was already reaching for the door. He made a sound of personal despair. "You people are the reason I have jaw pain." Inside, the entrance hall smelled like bleach, smoke, and adrenaline. Men crossed the marble in quick, controlled lines. Rosa stood at the foot of the stairs with blood on her sleeve that was not her own. When she saw me, she closed her eyes. "Of course you came back. Where's Dante?" "East Wing. I found him in the study with Cesare Bianchi." I knew Cesare. Family counsel, silver-haired, immaculate. The man who had sat across from me in the lawyer's office 2 years ago while Dante signed our marriage into ash. He turned when I entered, relief arriving too quickly on his face. "Thank God," he said. "He was about to send men after you." Dante's gaze hit mine first. Rage, relief, something rawer. He immediately strangled. "Why are you here? I came back. I can see that." Cesare stepped between us with the soothing confidence of a man too used to being trusted. The immediate issue is downtown. We intercepted a call from one of Conti's hotel managers. Raffaele is moving through the old ballroom kitchens under the Salvatore Hotel. If we move now, Dante's attention snapped to him. Why wasn't this on secure line? The servers are compromised. Something about the answer snagged in me. Tiny. Wrong. Maybe it was the way Cesare didn't look at Dante when he said it. Maybe it was because he smelled faintly of my father's brand of cheap cologne beneath the expensive stuff. And suddenly, I remembered seeing the same cufflinks at my father's card table once, years ago, glittering beside someone else's bad choices. Dante began issuing orders. Cars. Lower crews. No sirens. Rosa was told to lock down Gia. Nino muttered, "Wonderful. I was hoping to get shot in a former banquet space." And I made my mistake. when Cesare touched my elbow in the hallway and said, "Dante wants you moved through the service exit before the press sees the convoy." I followed him. It took less than 30 seconds to understand. The service elevator smelled like lemon cleaner and old steel. The moment the door shut, the guard behind me jammed a gun into my back. Cesare's face went blank, with the relief of a mask finally allowed to drop. I did not scream. I should have. Instead, I went cold. "You," I said. Cesare adjusted his cuffs. "You were always too observant in small ways and not observant enough in useful ones." My stomach turned. "You handled our divorce." "Yes." "And Lucia?" That landed. Not guilt. Annoyance. Lucia was an unfortunate necessity. I lunged for the emergency stop. The guard caught my wrist so hard, pain flashed white behind my eyes. Cesare sighed. "This is why Dante should never have married outside the life. You people insist on making everything personal." The elevator descended. When the doors opened, it was into the shuttered underbelly of the Salvatore Hotel old banquet kitchens, prep rooms, service corridors lined in white tile and fluorescent fatigue. I knew this level. My bakery had catered a charity gala here once, before my father's debts, before my marriage, before everything. Raffaele Conti waited in the pastry kitchen. He was handsome the way some knives were handsome. Mid-50s, iron gray at the temples, face lined by discipline rather than age. If Dante was still water over depth, Raffaele was polished stone. Elegant enough to make you forget how hard it was. "Elena." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You always did come back to him." I backed toward the steel prep table. "If you want Dante, use a mirror." He laughed softly. "There he is." It sickened me that I was right. Raphael came no closer. That was somehow worse. Men secure in power rarely needed distance, but he used it like theater. "I gave him a clean doctrine," he said. "No attachments he couldn't weaponize. No weakness outside blood." Then he married a pastry chef with frightened eyes. "I was his wife. You were his indulgence." The words should have wounded. Instead, they clarified. "Did you kill Lucia?" His gaze sharpened. "No." "I traded information to prevent a broader war. Her death was collateral." The room went very still. Collateral. That was the mirror. Not rage, logic without mercy. The exact future Dante had been building himself against. Raffaele nodded toward the industrial stove. "You bake, don't you? I'm told you're very good." A guard cut the zip tie off one hand only and shoved me toward the prep counter. Ingredients had been laid out with obscene care. Sugar, cream, citrus, a burner, a copper pot, humiliation as pageantry. "Make something," Raphael said, "before your husband arrives to ruin the evening." Ex-husband. His smile thinned. That technicality has become expensive. My hand shook once as I set the pot on the flame. Then I stopped letting him see it. Sugar obeyed heat. That was the first thing it ever taught me. Panic didn't. Men like Raffaele counted on the second one, so I held to the first. Measured water. Watched the syrup bloom clear, then gold. Took the cut on my wrist where the zip tie had burned and pressed it against the cool steel just to stay present. When the sugar hit hard crack, I lifted the pot. The nearest guard grabbed for my arm. I turned and threw. Caramel hit his hand and face. He screamed. The pot clanged across the tiles. I ran. Down the service corridor, past linen carts, through the freezer antechamber where my breath smoked in front of me. Behind me, shouting. Ahead, an alarm light dead from disuse. I yanked the manual suppression lever anyway, praying the ancient system still remembered how to flood. For one wild second, nothing. Then the ceiling burst white. Foam and water slammed down through the corridor, lights blew. Somewhere beyond it, men shouted Dante's name. I hit the service stair, slipped and fell hard enough to taste blood. Footsteps closed in above me. Too late was coming fast. I locked myself in the walk-in freezer because I ran out of better choices. The handle on the inside had been broken years ago and never repaired. I knew that because I had once spent 12 furious minutes trapped in there during a gala prep shift, while a line cook laughed himself breathless outside the door. I remembered the panic, the taste of metal in the cold, the exact spot on the wall where someone had scratched a crude saint in blue marker beside the temperature gauge. The saint was still there. So was the cold. I shoved a rack of sheet pans against the door and stood in the blue light with my lungs clawing for air, hair plastered to my face by foam and sweat. My hands hurt. My cut wrist burned. Somewhere outside, shots cracked through tile and steel. "Move!" a man shouted. Then Dante's voice, not loud. Worse. Quiet enough that men obeyed it with their bodies before their minds caught up. I pressed my forehead to the freezer door and closed my eyes. Not yet, I thought, not until I hear him close. The handle rattled once, twice. Elena. I made a sound I could not have described later, something between a sob and impact. I shoved the sheet pans aside and dragged the door open into a wall of winter air, and Dante Salvatore covered in someone else's blood. He looked at me once, then his hand was at the back of my neck, forehead against mine, both of us shaking too hard to call it breathing. I did not remember moving into him. I only knew I was there, hands clenched in the wet fabric at his waist, and his other arm had come around me with frightening force. Like if he loosened it, I might vanish. Behind him, Nino limped into view with a shotgun and an expression of exhausted offense. "I would like the record to show," he said, panting, "that I hate every one of you specifically." A laugh broke out of me at exactly the wrong moment. It collapsed into tears almost immediately. Nino pointed at me. No, none of that. If you cry now, I'll cry now, and then Dante will have to shoot me out of pity. Dante did not let me go. Status. Nino's face sobered. Cesare ran. Raffaella's moving through the ballroom above. Rosa says if you both live, she's making soup and assigning blame alphabetically. I laughed again, wet and broken. Dante's mouth brushed my temple once, a ghost of a kiss. Almost, and not almost at all. He drew back just enough to look at me fully. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Lie." "Yes," I said again. His thumb touched the cut at my wrist with horrifying gentleness. Little ghost. Warm now. Frayed. Mine to hear and hurt from. We moved through the service corridors fast. Dante in front, me in the middle, Nino behind muttering prayers and insults in alternating languages. The hotel groaned around us, the thud of distant guests being evacuated from upper floors, the hiss of dead sprinklers, the alarming intimacy of violence happening beneath luxury. At the base of the ballroom stairs, Dante stopped. The doors above stood open to darkness and chandelier dust. The old room had been stripped for renovation months ago. Now it was a hollow shell with mirrors sheeted in plastic and moonlight on the parquet like cold milk. "Stay with Nino," Dante said. "No." He turned. There was no time for softness, and yet something inside him still reached for it. "I mean it. I know this floor better than your men do." I swallowed. "The service lighting panel is behind the orchestra bar. If Raffaele cuts the main feed, I can bring the emergency grid back." Nino made an outraged sound. "Why is everyone in love with impossible plans?" "Because impossible plans were the only kind we had left." Dante stared at me 1 second longer, then nodded once. "Trust. Terrible and complete." We split. The ballroom smelled like plaster dust, wet wool, and old smoke. I stayed low along the wall, counting door frames. 1, 2, 3. The panel was where I remembered, hidden behind a temporary velvet drape. My fingers shook on the switches. Above the stage, voices rose. Raffaelle's first. Smooth, amused. "You chose a pastry chef over doctrine." Dante answered from somewhere unseen. "You murdered my sister for leverage. Collateral. Learn the language of men who survive." My breath caught. The slow mystery cracked wide open then, terrible in its simplicity. Lucia. Elena. Every woman in the margins of their power reduced to arithmetic. I threw the emergency breaker. Light slammed into the ballroom. Raffaella stood near the stage with a gun in one hand and Cesare bleeding at his feet. So that was that. No loyalty among practical men. Dante faced him from the aisle. Coat gone dark at the shoulder where blood spread fresh. Raffaele smiled without warmth. There she is, still choosing your life first. His eyes flicked to me. That was his mistake. Dante moved. The first shot took out the chandelier winch. Glass rained. I ran for cover as men shouted and the ballroom turned into splintered light. Nino, somewhere to my left, yelled, "If anyone scratches my face, I'm resigning." I hit the floor beside the bar just as Dante drove Raffaele back toward the stage. For one suspended second, the two of them looked alike enough to make my stomach turn. Same stillness, same economy, same willingness to finish what pain began. Mirror and man, Dante could win this, I thought, and become exactly what he hated. When the gunfire stopped, the room rang with it anyway. Raffaella had retreated through the stage door into the old roof access. Dante looked at me across the wreckage. We both knew one of us might not survive what came next. The roof above the ballroom had once been designed for garden parties. Now it looked like the aftermath of a failed prayer. Winter had stripped the planters bare. Wind tore across open concrete and skeletal trellises, carrying the river's iron smell with it. Beyond the parapet, Manhattan glittered with the indifference of a city that never paused for private wars. Dante pushed through the final access door first. Gun low, steps soundless. I followed because leaving had stopped being part of me somewhere between the marina and the freezer. Nino stayed below with the remaining men, cursing into his radio and trying to keep the stairwell secure. Raffaella stood near the edge beneath the dead frame of a summer canopy. He had lost his jacket. Blood darkened one sleeve. Even wounded, he looked composed enough to host a dinner. That was the worst thing about men like him. They could turn ruin into etiquette. "You brought her," he said, almost approving. "I stopped lying to her," Dante answered. Raphael smiled. "That will be your weakness until the day it kills you." A beat of silence. Wind, traffic far below, the scrape of my breath. Then Raffaele looked at me. "Do you know what he would have become without you?" "Yes," I said. Dante's head turned a fraction toward me. Raffaella's expression sharpened with interest. I took one step closer, shoes crunching over old glass. "He would have become you." Something unreadable moved through Dante's face. Raffaella sighed. "And yet you still stayed. Women do have a genius for choosing beautifully damaged disasters." "Not beautifully," I said. "Honestly." His laugh was soft. "That's worse." He fired first. The shot took a chunk from the parapet beside Dante's shoulder. Dante returned fire and moved left, using a planter for cover. I dropped behind a steel table, heart punching so hard it blurred my vision. Raffaella advanced in clean angles, never wasting motion. Exactly like Dante had at the marina. Mirror. There it was again. I saw the second gun before Dante did. Raphael had taped a backup beneath the table near the canopy post, within easy reach if he fell back far enough. A practical cruelty, a lawyer's trick with a soldier's finish. "Left!" I shouted. "Under the table?" Dante turned with the warning and fired through the metal frame just as Raffaele reached down. The backup weapon skidded across the concrete. Raffaella's attention snapped to me. That was my mistake and my usefulness in the same breath. He came for me instead, not because I mattered more than killing Dante, because hurting me would do the same thing slower. His hand caught my throat and drove me back into the canopy post so hard stars burst at the edges of my sight. The gun pressed under my jaw. The wind vanished, everything narrowed to his face, and the cold delight there. "This," he said to Dante, "is why you cut women loose before they can cost you men." Dante had gone still. It was the most frightening I had ever seen him. Let her go. Raffaella's mouth tipped. No. I did not think. Thinking belonged to safer people. My hand found the bronze emergency lantern bolted to the post, decorative, useless, heavy. I ripped it free and slammed it into Raffaella's injured arm. The shot went wild. Pain tore through my neck as I dropped and rolled. Dante crossed the distance between one heartbeat and the next. The fight ended without spectacle. That was the thing violence taught me in his world. Not rage. Efficiency. Grief put to work. Raffaella hit the concrete hard. Dante's gun slid away. For 3 brutal seconds they were only men blood, fists, history, breath. Cousins, brothers in doctrine if not in mercy. Then Dante's hand closed on the knife at his ankle. Raffaella laughed blood into his teeth. There, I knew you were still mine. Dante stopped. I saw the choice happen. Not in his hand, in his face. Kill him like the old world demanded, or do something harder and perhaps more dangerous, refuse the inheritance even now. Raffaele saw it too. If you spare me for her, you prove I was right. Dante looked at me. Not for permission, for witness. Then he drove the knife down. Not into the heart. Lower. Clean. Final enough to end the fight. Merciful enough to deny theater. Raffaella stared up at him in shock. Then something like bitter understanding. Dante leaned close. Voice so low I barely heard it over the wind. You taught me survival, he said. She taught me the cost. Raffaele died with his eyes open to the skyline. The silence after was worse than the shots. Dante stood there breathing hard, knife bloody in his hand, and looked more alone than any man should. I crossed the roof before fear could stop me and took the knife from his fingers. He let me. That felt bigger than everything. By the time Nino and the others reached us, it was done. Cesare was found below, finished by Raffaella's pragmatism before he could bargain. Tommaso's body was moved with honors. Rosa cried only once, in the pantry, where she thought no one could hear. Gia slept for 14 hours straight under guard and woke asking whether we were free now. Free was not the word. But morning came anyway. At dawn, Dante stood in the ruined ballroom while men hauled away plastic, glass, and blood. I found him there with his gold lighter in one hand and no cigarette between his fingers. He clicked it once. Closed it. Once. Closed it. I stepped beside him. He didn't look at me when he said, I can't give back what this cost. No, I said. The lighter clicked shut. He finally turned. His face was exhausted, changed, unmistakably his. It is over. War did not end in one clean line. It thinned. Funerals first. Paperwork second. Men moved, accounts frozen, properties reassigned, whispered loyalties tested and broken and remade. Dante shut down 3 of Raffaella's routes and handed 2 others to men who had earned the risk of trust. The Salvatore Hotel reopened its lower floors after 6 weeks, though the ballroom stayed closed under the fiction of renovation. I moved back into the villa without ever really deciding to. 1 drawer became mine, then half the bathroom, then the kitchen in practical, quiet ways. Nobody announced. Rosa pretended to complain and started ordering ingredients I liked before I asked. Gia took online classes at the library table and slowly stopped flinching at sudden noises. Some nights, I still woke reaching for fear before memory caught up. On those nights, Dante always knew. He never asked for the details. He just sat on the edge of the bed until my breathing matched his. The first time he slept beside me again, he stayed on top of the covers like a man granted temporary asylum. There was 6 inches of space between us and enough tension in it to light a city. Around midnight, I turned on my side and found him awake, staring at the ceiling. You always did brood expensively, I whispered. His mouth moved against the dark. Go back to sleep. I reached across the space and touched his wrist. That was all it took. Almost. Then, not almost. Not anymore. By spring, the hotel pastry kitchen was mine 3 mornings a week. Dante said it was temporary. Rosa said men said many things. Nino said if I kept bringing pistachio cream buns into the administrative offices, he would file for emotional dependency. He and Rosa had become the household's slowest, funniest catastrophe. He brought her flowers as if smuggling contraband. She accepted them like a queen tolerating tribute from a mildly disappointing province. Once I found him in the kitchen, Googling whether roasted chickpeas counted as romance food because he was trying to maintain abdominal dignity. Just tell her you like her, I said. He looked scandalized. And die of directness? Never. Later that same day, I watched Rosa hand him half a cannoli she claimed was too sweet. He went silent for a full minute afterward, staring at the pastry like he had seen heaven in dairy form. The proposal happened on an ordinary Thursday. That was the only way it ever could have. I was in the villa kitchen elbow deep in flour, cursing gently at dough that refused to behave, when Dante came home early and stood in the doorway watching me without speaking. I knew he was there anyway. The room changed around him. It always did. Also, the lighter clicked once in his hand before he pocketed it. I kept kneading. You're hovering. So I've been told. By people braver than me, apparently. He crossed to the island. There was a small box in his hand. Dark velvet dusted with flour where he had clearly set it down somewhere inappropriate and picked it back up again. My heartbeat changed shape. Dante looked at the dough, not at me. I had a speech. That sounds ominous. It was terrible. I smiled despite myself. I'd believe that. His gaze lifted then, direct and devastating in its honesty. I can offer you truth now, he said. Not safety, not a clean name, not a life untouched by what I am. His fingers tightened around the box. But I can offer you every morning I have left, every decision, every ugly part I would rather you never had to see, and every quiet part no one gets. A beat, if you want them. My eyes burned so fast I laughed. That's your terrible speech? It gets worse. Please don't make it. Relief moved almost invisibly through his shoulders. He opened the box. Inside lay no grand family diamond, just a narrow antique ring of dark gold and old cut stones, the kind chosen by men who feared sentiment but surrendered to it anyway. It was my mother's, he said. Lucia hid it from my father after the funeral because she said grief made men careless with beautiful things. Something in my chest gave way. I put floury fingers over my mouth. Dante, you do not answer out of pity. The command in his voice shook at the edges. Or grief, or because you stayed through the worst part. I set the dough down. Then I stepped into him, flour and all, and touched his face with both dirty hands. Yes, I whispered. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was no boss in the room, just the man who had bled himself into honesty and survived it badly. He slid the ring onto my finger. Perfect fit. Of course it was. Dante had always been a monster for detail. Then his hand came to rest at my waist, warm and steady. Little ghost, he said, and this time the words held nothing cold at all. You're impossible. I laughed through tears. You proposed in a kitchen. You came to me on a serving tray. We are past conventional. That laugh pulled one from him too, brief and stunned like he still wasn't used to the sound of it. That night we ate dinner with Rosa, Gia, and Nino at the long table with the windows open to spring rain. Halfway through dessert, Rosa held up my left hand, squinted at the ring, and said to Dante, "Acceptable." Nino clutched his chest. If she ever says that to me, I will marry her in the pantry. Rosa didn't even look at him. Finish your vegetables. It was the happiest I had ever seen him, and when Dante stole a sugared strawberry from the plate I was carrying to the sink, I let him. 9 months later, I knocked on Dante's office door with a silver tray in my hands. The house had changed with the seasons. Autumn gold outside the long windows. Cinnamon and espresso in the kitchen. Gia laughing more often than she cried. Nino somehow still alive despite declaring weekly that love and cardio were both elaborate punishments designed specifically for him. He and Rosa were not exactly together, which in their case meant everyone in the house had accepted. They were doomed to each other and the two of them were still pretending surprise. The Salvatore Hotel ballroom had reopened under another name. My pastry room sat 1 floor below it, bright and warm and entirely mine. Some mornings I still paused outside the service elevator before stepping in. Trauma never vanished as neatly as fiction wanted. It just learned your routines and sat quietly inside some of them. Dante knew that too. That was part of what made peace with him feel radical. Not that the shadows disappeared, that he never asked me to deny seeing them. I balanced the tray with one hand and knocked again. Inside, I heard papers shift. Then that old sound, the metallic click of Dante's gold lighter. For a second, I was back in the penthouse hallway, half naked and terrified, with a gun under silver and tears. I couldn't stop. My body remembered before my mind did. Then the door opened, and there he was in shirt sleeves and late afternoon light. No cigarette lit, just the lighter in his hand and surprise already warming his face. He looked from me to the tray and one dark brow lifted. "Special room service, sir?" I said. His mouth changed first, then his eyes. "Dangerous joke, little ghost." "I know." I stepped inside. The office smelled like cedar shelves, coffee gone cool, and the colder edge of his cologne drifting up from the collar of his shirt. The tray held a single dessert under a silver cloche. Small, precise, mine. He closed the door behind me softly. Before I could say another word, I glanced at the desk and saw the edge of a contract, too near the open flame of the lighter. "Careful," I said automatically. "You'll burn the papers." The room stilled. It took me a second to understand why. Dante looked at me the way he had in the hotel suite, in the poisoned breakfast room, in every terrible moment when my first instinct had been him before myself. There was no danger now. No gun. No ambush. Just a domestic warning spoken without thought. And it still landed. Slowly he closed the lighter. "What?" I asked. His gaze stayed on my face. Nothing. But it was not nothing. I knew that by then. I knew what it cost him to be loved by someone who still reached for his safety first. What it healed. What it kept tender. I set the tray on the desk and lifted the cloche. Inside sat a sugar shell glazed to glass bright amber over dark chocolate mousse and orange cream. A tiny gold line painted around the base. On top, instead of spun sugar or candied peel, rested one folded piece of white cardstock. Dante stared at it. Then at me. My hands had started to shake. Ridiculous, considering everything we had lived through. Men had died in front of me. I had been kidnapped, hunted, loved badly, loved well, chosen darkness with my eyes open. And still, this made me feel more exposed than blood ever had. He unfolded the card, read it once, then again. When he looked up, the entire room had gone strange and bright around the edges. "Elena." I laughed because if I didn't, I would cry. "It's not very elegant." The card was from my doctor. 12 weeks. Healthy. He said nothing. That scared me more than anything. "Dante?" He set the paper down with absurd care, as if the future inside it might bruise. Then he came around the desk so slowly, I felt every step in my throat. "Say something," I whispered. His hand came up to my face. Warm. Shaking. "You brought me dessert before telling me," he said. I made a helpless sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You skipped lunch, that was it." The crack in him, the one no one else ever saw. It moved through his face and left him open in a way that still took my breath. He bent, pressed his forehead to mine, and I felt the exact second joy hit him hard enough to hurt. "You still do it," he murmured. "What?" "Choose me first." My eyes burned. There were answers to that. Dozens, none of them usable around the thickness in my throat, so I told the truth. "So do you." He kissed me then, quiet and deep and utterly certain. The kind of kiss earned over funerals and kitchens and nights, survived on trust more than sleep. Later, after Rosa cried on me in the pantry and Nino announced he was too young and beautiful to become an uncle to anyone, and Gia shrieked loud enough to wake half the household, Dante found me alone in the kitchen with the dessert plates. Sunset had gone copper in the windows. The house hummed with ordinary life. Glasses clinked in another room. Someone laughed. Water ran. No one was bleeding. Dante lifted the gold lighter. I watched the flame bloom. He held it to the tiny candles I had set in the remaining sugar shells for no reason, except that joy, like grief, needed ceremony. One by one, they caught. The same click. the same hand, nothing like before. He looked at the candles, then at me. Home, he said simply. That was the most dangerous word he had ever given me. And the safest. I stood there with flower on my sleeve and his child under my heart, and understood that ordinary had become the boldest thing either of us had ever done. Still, some nights, I thought about Tommaso, about Lucia, about the part of Dante that had died on that roof so this softer life could live. Love did not erase the cost. It only taught us how to carry it without looking away. Dante touched my ring with one finger. What are you thinking? I looked at him. At the man who had once opened a door to find me in tears and danger. At the man who now lit candles in our kitchen and watched me like surviving me was still the most astonishing thing he had ever done. That I'd choose you again, I said. His eyes closed briefly. Little ghost. Warm. Final. Home.